I would like to start the meeting of the school board meeting of November 22nd, 2016.
And ask me just to say the pledge, rise and say the
Now, if we can rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance.
Okay, flag's over there. Ready? I pledge allegiance.
I pledge to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You're up next. Yeah, say it right into the mic.
Okay. Skyview is super. Students and teachers are kind. Skyview is the youngest school in the district. We are very committed to build good character. We integrate technology to make learning more fun. We know that education is the key to success at Skyview. We stand united. We love Skyview, and we work together as a community to improve our education as we strive for excellence. Together here, we are a big family, not just teachers and students in a classroom. We are here to work together, become better students, and have fun. Thank you.
Come on. All right, we'll start with you, Anna. Anna, are you ready to assume all the responsibilities of being a junior school board director? Yes. Are you sure? Congratulations.
Thank you.
Are you sure you are ready to assume all the responsibilities of being a junior school board director?
Yes.
Okay, great. Congratulations. Thank you.
Could have photobomb. I thought about it.
There's your phone. I didn't get one on yours.
All right. Thank you, Quentin and Anna. I appreciate you coming in today. By way of announcements, the public is hereby advised of the audio and video recording of this meeting for purposes of rebroadcasting. In terms of attendance, we have everybody here tonight, except for Mr. Roth. We wish him luck during his busy season at the flower shop. In terms of recognition and guests and scheduled speakers, I'd like to turn that over to Dr. Zerbe.
Well, good evening, members of the board. Thank you, Mr. President. This evening, on the agenda, there are two presentations. So we have a transportation update by Dr. Harney. Then Dr. Gattona will be providing the board and the public with our annual state assessment results. And lastly, there's an agenda item later on in the agenda under other for the SRO, or School Resource Officer. It's my recommendation that after hearing both the transportation and state assessment results, that we return to our seats and allow Mr. Sesnovic and his committee to present some information related to School Resource Officer prior to proceeding into the remainder of the agenda. So if you will, members of the board, if you could take your seats in the front row, and Dr. Harney will begin his presentation on transportation update. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Well, good evening, everyone. Tonight I will be providing a Transportation Department update, as well as potential plans for the department moving forward. The agenda for tonight's presentation is to 1, discuss our current status, 2, highlight the major decisions to be made concerning routing services and routing software, 3, highlight the district's needs as they pertain to the Transportation Department oversight function, and 4, talk about next steps so we are prepared for a successful rollout next school year. So as to our current status, I think everyone is aware that at this point we do not have a transportation manager. We have quite a few questions about the efficiency of our current bus routes, and we need to proceed with plans for the transportation routing needs in the future so we can avoid any of the similar situations that we've had in the last couple of years. We have several major decisions concerning routing to discuss. First are the decisions that need to be made about the routing tasks themselves. Number 1, we need to analyze our current routes for both efficiency and customer service and begin preparing any changes that might be needed for the next school year. This could be an extensive project. Number 2, we have our annual routing needs to consider, of which are the annual rollover of current students to the next grade level that takes place every year, and the adding and removing of students in the summer, as well as year-round when we get kids that move into the district and leave the district. Third, we also have our daily needs to consider. These take into account any minor changes, such as ones suggested by our drivers and first student personnel, as well as ones made to address parent and/or district concerns. Other major decisions concerning routing are about the routing software we'll use going forward. Currently, we utilize BusBoss by Orbit Software. We may recommend remaining with this product or look at other options offered by other vendors. The products listed are some of the major players in the industry and are used by some of our neighbors. Several on the list are currently utilized by First Student in some of their other operations. All the companies behind the software listed can provide routing services as well as selling the routing software itself. And last but not least is the transportation oversight function. We need to look at our desired structure for that oversight. Will we be looking at a transportation manager or possibly a third party to provide the following functions? First student interface on a daily basis, to define the delegation of duties between the district and the vendor, to review cost efficiencies, to review operational effectiveness, to provide billing reviews, to provide routing efficiency reviews, to handle parent communication, to complete state reporting, and to assure redundancy and cross-training to maintain smooth operations. So what are the next steps? Vendor demonstrations will be set up in the early to mid-December. These demonstrations will be for both software and routing services. The Transportation Steering Committee will be reconvened to discuss the options being recommended and to discuss the oversight function and the possibilities for that going forward. The plan is to provide a recommendation for the board by the January meeting for the solutions for the areas of need that are outlined in this presentation. We hope to begin routing in February for optimal success for the following school year and next summer's ESY program. This needs to be done regardless of the eventual oversight decision due to the need to do a comprehensive review of our current system by a chosen software and/or service provider. Time is of the essence for this process for a successful opening next year. And we need to keep in mind that any school consolidation decisions may have possible impacts on this process. That concludes my presentation. Are there any questions?
Are there any, our position here this evening is to provide the board with the direction that, we eventually need to take. So while there may be some questions, we do have a follow-up presentation on the assessment results. So I asked the board, would you like to have a conversation about transportation with Dr. Harney and the rest of the administration now, or are you satisfied with understanding that, there are certain things that we're looking at in terms of routing, software, and services for oversight, and allow us to come back in January with some recommendations?
I think, so,
Sure.
One of the primary questions is how efficiently are we now running after 3.5 months? And if we're still having problems, what are we doing to rectify those problems?
I think we're running as efficiently as we can with the routes as they are. There's been quite a few tweaks to the routes. I think there needs to be an overall look at all the routes. We want to go through that all again. We need to give our drivers more time to test any new routes and give any feedback. I think that did not get its just due over this summer. So I think we're running about as efficiently as we can with the routes as they're established now and have dealt with all the major problems that we can deal with. But do I think it's optimal? I do not.
So it's your recommendation to run out the rest of the school year as is?
Correct. We've made quite a few changes for both our drivers and the parents and the students, and would like to try to keep that to a minimum going forward.
You indicated you were going to analyze the current routes. What's going to be the process for doing that? Will you involve a lot of people? Is it a computerized analysis?
I will personally not be involved in doing that, but for a great reason. I mean, what we're looking to do is hire somebody to do our routing for us, a professional that has a lot of experience and a lot of depth, and that will include the local knowledge that we have amassed over the many years in our bus compound. We have a lot of people that know a lot about the local area. So it's going to take, all the routes need to be transferred to, if let's say we go to a new company instead of Bus Boss, all that information has to be transferred over. They will do an overall analysis of the efficiency, and then we will turn over to our local experts to look at it and see if those suggestions made sense. It was kind of what we had set up for this summer, but as I said, I think having more time to do it in a more formalized way, with including our drivers all the way along, I think is going to be a better process.
Two quick ones. The transportation steering committee, does that include the local members?
That includes everyone that met, I think we met 2 or 3 times over the summer. Yes.
And the software to evaluate, will they be connected to a broader information in a student database that allows for real-time? Is that
The goal, one
all those providers?
of the criteria for selecting a provider would be that interoperability that we would be able to use, that they would be able to read our data, and we wouldn't have to go through a lot of gyrations to make sure our data is transferring properly over. We had some issues with that last summer, and we want to avoid that going forward.
Other questions?
So Bus Boss does have deficiencies, is that clearly been identified, or are we not using Bus Boss to its optimal capability?
I'm not here to say that they have deficiencies, but we also don't know the extent that some of these other programs could be better. We've had Bus Boss for quite a while, and it's worthwhile looking at what the other software has to offer, as well as what the other companies have to offer as far as support, depth of support, how many people they have that could come on site, do remote support. So there's a lot of things we want to look at from a criteria standpoint, so we can do a comparison.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Harney. Next for a presentation, we have Dr. Gattona. Dr. Gattona. And this is our annual assessment results presentation. This will be similar, or maybe even the same, as the presentation presented this past month at the Education Committee. Dr. Gattona.
Thank you. Good evening. This is the presentation that I gave at the Education Committee meeting earlier in November. So what I will do in the next several slides is present to you an overview of these items: the PSSA results, the Keystone exam results, which are, of course, both our state tests, the Pennsylvania Value Added Assessment System, which is PVAS, which measures student growth, the school performance profile across the district, what we have recognized thus far in looking at the data in terms of our successes and the areas that need more focus, and our next steps. As you may recall, last year was the first year of the new core-aligned PSSAs. As a result of the new assessments, no schools that administered PSSAs were given school performance profile scores in 2015. This past spring, 2016, was the first time since instituting the new assessments that SPP scores were assigned to those schools. Because there had not been major changes to the Keystone exams last year, our high school did receive an SPP score in 2015 and again in 2016. So I'll be summarizing those as well as the PVOS results across the district. So just as a reminder about what is calculated in each of these areas of results, with the Keystones and the PSSAs, we're talking about achievement. We're looking to have a higher number of students each year who are proficient or advanced on those assessments. The PSSAs are administered to students in grades 3 through 8 in English Language Arts and in math. Students in grades 4 and 8 are also tested in science. Those tests are given, as you know, on specific days over the course of a few weeks in the spring. Students who miss a test can come in, make it up, etc., but they're given at that one point, and then we return the tests, and those are finished. The Keystones are also based on achievement. They may, however, be taken more than once. They are considered to be end-of-course exams for those 3 areas: Algebra 1, Biology, and Literature. And so students who have completed Algebra 1 and Biology take the exam, and once they take the appropriate literature course, which had been recommended by the state to be in 10th grade. Student scores are then banked until their 11th grade year. On the other hand, we have measures, and these 2 measures that we look at here are the PVOS and the SPP. The PVOS scores represent growth, but are based on the achievement of groups of students in the state assessment. So they look at a group of students' growth over time as a cohort from one year to the next. The SPP is a school's score, which includes those 3 aspects from those 3 measures, the PSSA or Keystones, as well as PVOS, as well as areas such as closing the achievement gap and opportunities for extra credit. And I'll expand on those more shortly. So last year, when the PSSA, the new PSSA, was given, Pedro Rivera, who is Pennsylvania Secretary of Education, put out some statements about the PSSA results and what we should expect over the next several years. This year, he made some additional points in looking at the 2016 results. So he told us student performance improved or remained steady in nearly every category of testing in math and English Language Arts. While the percentage of students scoring at grade level or above, that is proficient or advanced, grew, there is still more to do to help students scoring in the basic or below basic levels. So we're seeing more students moving into the proficient or advanced levels, but we're still seeing numbers in the basic or below basic levels across the state that we need to do more work on. This third point is something that was really the crux of what he had said last year in 2015, talking about how challenging going to the PA Corps can be for schools because the skills are, they're different. They're more rigorous, and so, of course, schools have been realigning curriculum, getting resources as needed, doing professional development as needed, etc. And all schools have been working on this over the course of time and continue to do so. He mentioned that student performance on the PSSA underscores the importance of providing adequate resourcing to all schools in order to overcome the challenges of adopting new standards and to ensure each student has access to the tools needed to learn and be prepared for the 21st century workforce. This comment seems to be something of a a reflection on perhaps what the state needs to be doing in terms of their funding. And lastly, he said that while the transition to the core is ongoing, the data from this year, from 2016, reinforces the notion that the longer students are educated using the new standards, the better they will perform. So, in other words, the better we are aligned, we are vertically aligned across K to 12, the more we will see students progressing in a positive way. So this year, these were the 2016 PSSA results in terms of the percentage of students who were proficient and advanced at each grade level in each subject area. And you can see that I've set up here Methacton as well as the county average and the state average. So the state had posted an Excel spreadsheet which had all of the scores of all of the schools from all of the counties. And the percentages that you see here are taken for Methacton and for the county are taken from those calculations. Consistently, you can see that the Methacton percentages are higher than the state averages by 17 points or more, and our scores generally range from being slightly higher to being several points higher than the averages for the county. Again, these scores reflect Secretary Rivera's reflection that student performance improved or remained steady in nearly every category of math and ELA. This slide is a comparison between our 11th grade Keystone scores, the county and the state. These were taken from the 2016 SPP results, and they reflect the scores of our current 12th graders. Again, when the SPP is calculated for the high school, they are calculating it based on the 11th graders from that particular year. I also have up there at the bottom the Arcola percentage of proficient and advanced students on Algebra 1, which was 88.7%. Those scores will be banked until the students are in 11th grade. So they did not count in these particular results. So what we saw in the previous slides was achievement. We are looking at measuring students' performance at a single point in time. We are told through PDE that achievement generally is highly correlated with students' demographics. It compares student performance to the PA core standards, and as we know, each year grade level achievement is reported on a different group of students. On the other hand, growth measures a group of students' growth over time, that is years, so looking to see how they are progressing as a cohort, and if they are meeting expectation that they will demonstrate at least 1 year's growth. There's typically little to no relationship with students' demographics and growth. That is, all students should be able to grow no matter where they are on the proficiency scale. It compares the performance of a student group to their own prior performance, and again, from year to year, it is measured on the same group of students. So when we looked at our PVOS results showing growth in our district, we looked at what areas in all of our different grade levels did our students meet or exceed the growth standard. Where did we have a strong population in that cohort that met or exceeded the growth standard? So on this slide, all of those, you see all of the subject areas tested at all of the grade levels. And all of those subject areas that are in blue are subject areas where at least 50% of that student cohort met or exceeded the growth standard. That is, they grew at least 1 year, 1 year's worth. In areas that are black, we did not see at least 50% of the students meeting or exceeding the growth standard. However, it's important to note that because they did not overall meet or exceed the growth standard, that it does not mean they didn't make any growth. Again, the growth standard is at least 1 year, so they may have grown, some students in that cohort may have grown half a year, for example. And so you can see that in most of the areas in which we tested, we had a majority of students that did meet or exceed the growth standard for their grade level. So then we move to the SPP calculations because, again, they take into consideration all of those items you previously saw. So as a reminder, the SPP is calculated in this way. 50% of it is made up of school academic performance scores. Those are indicators of academic achievement, as well as indicators of closing the achievement gap for all students and closing the achievement gap for historically underperforming students. And on the next slide, I'm going to explain the closing the achievement gap a little bit more. 40% of the school academic performance score is made up of indicators of academic growth and PVOS, so depending upon the percentage of students in that cohort that made growth. And then the final 10% is based on what they term other academic indicators, which would include items such as graduation, promotion, and attendance rates. And then finally, schools may earn up to 7 additional points, extra credit points, for areas related to advanced achievement. So all of those students who scored proficient or advanced, they then pull out all of those who scored advanced and add them in for extra credit, both on the state tests as well as industry assessments. We also get extra credit points for students earning 3 or higher on AP exams or 4 or higher on International Baccalaureate if we had that program. So closing the achievement gap. It's based on the percentage of proficient and advanced students. So scores are recorded for the baseline year in each subject area. So schools with keystone scores, so our high school, for example, they use 2013 as the baseline year because they have consistently had SPP scores. For schools with PSSAs, they are using 2015 as the baseline year. Schools have 6 years to close the achievement gap. So the way that they calculate it, they look at a school with a proficient advanced total, for example, of 80%. If it were a high school, they would be looking at 2013. And if they calculated a total of proficient advanced of 80% in 2013, they then take the difference of 100 and 80, which would be 20, and they then take 50% of that. And so that school would have to close the achievement gap by 10% by the year 2019. Again, they have 6 years to close that gap. The 10% is calculated on a yearly basis. So in each of the 6 years, the school would be expected to increase achievement scores by at least 1.67%. So if somewhere along the line, if by the 3rd year they have already exceeded that 10%, they're in pretty good shape unless they start to go backwards at some point. But for the most part, they would be in good shape. If, however, they made some movement toward closing that achievement gap, but they didn't hit the 1.67%, then they would readjust what they needed to do in the next few years. So they do this for a category of both all students as well as historically underperforming students. And the historically underperforming students are considered to be those students with IEPs, those from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, and those who are ELL students. So in 2016, these were our SPP scores across each of our schools. And we looked at what the rest of the county did and where we stood in the midst of that, and where everybody, it seems, across districts are somewhat in a variety of places. For example, once you start getting into middle schools and especially elementary schools, you will find that where there are 4, 5, 6 or more elementary schools, for example, some may be in the top, in the top 10 to 15, and others from that district may be in the middle, and others may be toward the end. So it's very scattered this year in terms of where people sit with the SPPs. So these were some of the recognized successes that we found as we looked at our scores and at our data, as we dug into the data a little bit more. We recognized an increase in ELA achievement, in particular in grades 5 and 7, in math achievement in grades 4 and then in 6 through 8, and in science in both grades 4 and 8. In the Keystones, there was an increase in Algebra 1 achievement in grade 8 and in biology in grade 11. With regard to PVOS and SPP, we recognize that at all levels, growth standards were met or exceeded for the majority of students in one or more subject areas, as I showed you previously. Growth in science was consistent across grades 4, 8, and 11. In math, growth was evident in 5 of 6 grade levels, and in ELA, it was evident in 3 of 6 grade levels. On the SPP, all of our schools earned extra credit points. All of them received points for advanced achievement, and our high school received additional points for scores of 3 or higher on the AP exams. We also had evidence of meeting at least expected growth toward closing the achievement gap. 5 of our buildings did this in math for all students, and 4 of our buildings accomplished this in science for all students. In terms of historically underperforming students, 2 of our buildings were on the path toward closing the achievement gap for math, and 2 for science. Focus areas. As we continue on a regular basis to look at the areas that we want to strengthen, we know that we need to regularly review the proficiency and skills that our students are showing. So we know that we need to strengthen our ELA at all grade levels. We're working to ensure curriculum alignment to the core, selecting resources to match curriculum needs, and we're providing the appropriate professional development. We are also continuing to work on implementing our core-aligned math instruction, identify the areas within resources that need to be supplemented, providing the professional development for the areas of greatest need, and then we are enhancing efforts for growth across specific student groups. Again, the IEP students, the ELL students, and the economically disadvantaged. Some of the things that we that we've already begun to do in terms of addressing the focus areas. We have developed grade level skills documents based on the PA core, in particular in grades K through 4, and work has also been done at 5 and 6 with that. We are investigating new ELA resources for K to 6. 5 and 6, in grades 5 and 6, beginning last year, they started implementing, and they've continued to do so this year, focus on literacy instruction at that level. And we have made updates to the ELA curriculum in grades 7 and 8, which was recently approved. In math, we're supporting teachers as they continue to work with the new resources. That would be both with the Math in Focus for K to 4. 5 and 6 is in its second full year of their new resources from Glencoe, and we also started with some new resources this year in 7 and 8. We're assisting with data with our 2 teachers on assignment, as well as with others, and providing other supports to the teachers as needed. In Math in Focus, we also have ongoing teacher training and the parent universities. We had our most recent teacher training and parent universities on our in-service day on November 8th. Looking at growth, we really, again, we need to make sure that we are helping our students grow in their learning and their understanding across all groups, and especially with some in our historically underperforming groups. So we're providing additional reading and math support in Title I schools through the use of instructional aids. We added math in this year. We also added Arcola to receiving Title I services this year. We're using new core resources with all students and involving all teachers in professional development so that there is more consistency for students and they're all learning the same skills. And we're using a team approach for attending appropriate professional development workshops. So again, if there's something where it's best for, if it's something focused on ELL, where we might have both an ELL and a regular education teacher attending that so that they can bring information back together. And then our next steps, obviously we will need to be selecting that ELA resource for K-6. We'll be targeting focus areas for secondary ELA, providing professional development in targeted areas based on whatever the focus skills are that we need to be addressing, as well as formative assessment, what teachers are seeing on a regular basis. We are looking to update the Algebra 1 textbooks for grades 8 and 9, continuing our curriculum review in designated areas, and continue our support for our new math programming. And then I added a slide so that if people wanted to get more information on any of those areas, they would be able to do so easily. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Katona. I'd ask the board members if they would be so kind to return to their seats, and then we'll open the floor up to some questions related to the assessment presentation. Thank you again, Dr. Katona, for your presentation. Are there any questions for Dr. Katona at this time?
I asked all my questions at the education meeting, but I just wanted to thank you again, because the second time around, it's even more impressive just being able to put that into terms we can all understand, and I know a lot of work goes into all of that from students, teachers, and administrators, especially yourself. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for that presentation. It was very informative. One of the things which kind of jumped out at me, and not necessarily on Methacton level, but in terms of a higher level, is there any talk around the 8th grade math scores? It was kind of one of the numbers on the screen that kind of jumped out at you, because I think it was both for Methacton, for the county, and for the state. You have 50% below what they would consider proficient or advanced. That number sounds a little scary to me, I guess, but we're all in the same kind of boat. So is some of that the new testing, or, is there some ideas out there on how to get those numbers up, across the state?
I think in general, it's what we had seen last year was that there was a lot of shifting, a lot of movement of some different skills that students were being tested on, as well as some of the ways that questions were being asked, that really took it up a few more notches for them than perhaps it did for other grade levels. And so I think it really goes back to that one comment from the Secretary of Ed in Pennsylvania, where the more exposure students are getting to those skills, the better we will see them do, and actually the more well-prepared we'll see them for other courses as they move along. I don't think anybody, looks and says, well, that's great, that we're at that percentage, but at the same time, we did see some movement from the previous year, and I think there's a lot in terms of how IUs are helping districts understand the mathematical practices, and more talk about math with students, and the types of work that they should be involved in on a regular basis. So I think it's just getting more used to that.
Other questions?
Yeah, I have a couple. Just because I like looking at numbers. So I think it was on the PSSA chart. 5 and 6 math was down versus the county. The one might have been just a tad above the county average. On most of the others, we were considerably higher than the county. You have any thoughts about what might be the issue there?
Yes. Well, grade 5 was down slightly from the county, and grade 6 was up slightly from the county.
Yeah.
So last year we saw some, again, much like grade 8, we saw some very different skills going into 6th grade that teachers had not previously been teaching. The IUs caught on to, started having some sessions so that teachers could better understand, better teach, etc. But I think for our purposes here, we were through our first complete year of using a new resource at that level, which I think may be some of what we're seeing here, because again, once you're using a new resource, it's, you may expect you're not going to automatically see, everything move up in a positive way as you might initially want it to. I can tell you, however, that when I went through the scores, I looked at 2 teachers who had piloted the resources that we were using, and looked at how their students had done in that second year, and those scores were quite impressive. So I would expect, again, as they get more used to the type of thinking and the type of work that they're doing in that way, that we'll see those grow.
Okay, thank you. A couple more quick questions. Once again, for me, it'd be great, we saw the averages versus the county. Do we ever take those averages and pick the top quartile of the county and compare ourselves to the top quartile? I don't know where we'd fall. It's hard for me to get a perspective on that, but to me, we ought to be striving to achieve to be in that top quartile, and I'd like to see our averages against kind of the the best of the county versus the overall county. I just think that would be beneficial, because I like to think of our educational programs kind of on the higher end of the county. So for me, it'd be interesting to see, and I don't know if that's something that's doable or not doable. I don't know how your data comes to you, but it would be beneficial to see that. Two other things.
So let us get that data for you. Is that something we can do, correct? Okay, so let us get that and share that with the board.
That'd be great. I think that would be probably something that everybody would be interested in. I know we said successes, Dr. Catono, in there, and then we went into focus areas. Should I translate focus areas into what you perceive as kind of misses, or we didn't come up to? Okay. I just wanted to make sure I was translating that right. And then I guess the other thing, where possible, it would be helpful to see the previous year's Methacton scores versus the current year. And I know in some cases the testing has changed, so that might make it a difficult comparison. So you basically start a new baseline year, but where applicable, it would be good for at least my perspective to see the difference year to year where it's similar testing.
And probably next year, I can appreciate you asking that, and probably next year that would be something that may be appropriate across the board, because we will then be 3 years into the PSSA based on the core. And of course, we can always do that with the high school, because that hasn't really changed.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Any other questions? Yes?
So one of the suggestions you have for future steps is professional development, and it seems that every place we turn there is a need for professional development. Do you have enough time to do all the professional development that we call for and that will be beneficial for the students?
I would have a hard time telling you that we ever have enough time for the professional development that we want. However, I think we do everything we can with the time that we do have, and we also carve out in different ways as we can. For example, if there's, if there is something, just yesterday, for example, I was able to bring in reading specialist and intervention specialist for a presentation on the resources, because then they can go back to their schools with the ELA and turn around and give a brief explanation to them, to the rest of the teachers, before they start to look at that. Something seemingly little like that is really professional development, because they're starting to get the first insight and then do turnaround. Ms. Ricky has been very good about looking for what are the needs, talking with teachers, talking with administrators, finding out what are the needs, and then what is the IU offering, or what webinars are available, and how can we get those out to people. So I think we are consistently looking for ways to, steal a little more time, and as I said, also to certainly use the time that we do have in an efficient way.
Any other questions from members of the board? Mr. Phillip?
The few components, just breaking it down very simply, you have the student component, the teacher component, the instructional material and tests. Can you identify, when you're trying to get these numbers to improve, can you identify if it's a student problem, whether it's based on demographics or is it instructional material, or is it teacher, where that's stopping the scores to be higher or the testing to be better? Can you identify it down to the class or the particular teacher, the particular demographic, or the student, or the curriculum that we're teaching? We went from one math program to focus math. or Math in Focus, and, you know, speaking to some parents in elementary school, they still don't get it 100%, and even though we had a class for the parents, some of them don't have the time to keep going through and figuring that program out. So, you know, we lose that component of the parent being able to help the students. Have we been able to focus in on what the actual problem is? I know you're very broad in saying that professional development or different testing, but how well can you pinpoint the problem?
The first thing we always look at is our curriculum. We look to see, is what we have in place serving the needs according to the skills that we should be teaching our students and the types of practices that our students should be engaged in learning. And that's the first place that we always go. And all of our curriculum has not necessarily been serving that because there have been big changes from the state in the last few years. And so that's what, with the Math in Focus, for example, we've been working toward getting the right curriculum in place. Again, we put our curriculum together, we get a resource, we say, this resource is going to help us in delivering our curriculum in the way it should be delivered. That's where the professional development comes in. So really, all of it does work together. In terms of, you know, parents understanding the math, yes, we are still running parent universities. We have a link on our website that parents can go to. We've been doing a lot with the teaching professionals that we have to support both the classroom teachers as well as to support parents and, of course, our students. And so as we start to get into something, we can't say it's this classroom or it's, you know, it's different groups of students or whatever the case might be, because we are really looking at everything overall. And then as we move along, we'll identify whether there are particular areas, whether with regard to groups of students that we need to do a little more work with in terms of training teachers or in terms of working with those students. So it's a process.
When you look at the curriculum, that stays pretty static. That doesn't change much unless you change the whole program. So that's a constant, I would say. For instance, you took in Math in Focus, that whole program. But the instructional books, you have a book. The words in the book, the numbers in the books don't change when you're teaching that once you adopt that course. So the variables might be the student and the teacher. So if we're really trying to zero in on bringing a class or a group of students, bringing their test scores up, how do we test the teachers to make sure that they're efficient in teaching that course? Like, what's the baseline? How do we compare those teachers, how they're conducting their classes or teaching that curriculum? How are we looking at that and making sure that that's not the weak link? Or is it the course material that's the weak link? How are we precisely identifying that? Because, I had 22 employees this year, and I can identify the employees that are not carrying their weight and which ones have to not have a job or should get a raise. And you have your own parameters, how you look at them and judge how they're conducting their job or their duties. So my question is, how are we checking those standards and making sure that they're at the top level.
If I could just jump in a second, Dr. Katona, I think while we certainly want to answer your question, I think the one piece that you may be leaving out in your assessment of what's constant and what's changing is that the end game is the part that's changing. So, for example, you may recall 4 years ago, for example, when you looked at Methacton PSSA scores, those scores were in the I'm going to guess in the 90 percentile. So you saw some of the scores here today. They're in the high 80s, and you would then want to assume that we're doing something different, or our teachers may not be doing something, or we don't have the right materials. But the end game, the way we are assessing and the skills that are being measured has changed. And so while Dr. Katona is sharing with you and the board that there are a lot of variables in trying to raise achievement scores, professional development being one, how well we provide that, the training that we and how well prepared our teachers are to deliver any new resources or curriculum, that's all part of that. But we can't forget the types of assessments that we're being measured against. And all I want to make sure that the board understands is why I think there's something fair to say about every piece along the way. We can't forget the biggest piece, and I think the biggest piece is how the target changes. And the changes in the target present challenges for us to say, well, maybe we need a new resource to steer the ship towards that target in a faster, better, a more efficient mechanism. Or we need to provide more professional development in order to target our students to teach, or our teachers to teach a certain way in order to, address the things that are being measured. So I think, Dr. Katona can speak to the question on how well we prepare our teachers, but I just want you to know that target is always moving for us. And that's really where, we're challenged. And so what Dr. Katona was saying in her original presentation this evening was just that while the PA Common Core started moving, Methacton was slow to move with it and make some adjustments. So we think that, so does the Secretary of Ed, that over time we will catch up to where we believe we should be and commensurate with our previous performance in PSSAs and Keystone exams. And therefore, it's a matter of directing the ship in the right direction. So, Dr. Katona, I don't know if you have more to add to that, or if there's more clarity you can give from Mr. Phillips in his question.
I think one of the points you made was a very good one. Both the teaching and the materials have changed over the need for new materials, the need for new teaching has changed over the last few years, and we are at different levels only in our first or second year of really embracing that, and it's a lot to for everyone to wrap their heads around. We're supporting teachers on a regular basis. Our goal isn't to say, wow, you're not doing very well with this. You shouldn't be doing this. We don't want to go down that road. We want to support them. We're looking for, what are your questions? Where maybe are you having more difficulty with something, and then maybe have some modeling done, have a way of supporting them so that they can be better in what they're doing on a regular basis.
Yeah, so I think Dr. Katona is getting into some of the details of the discussions that principals often have with teachers as we're all working toward performance. But the bigger picture of all that is there's a teacher assessment process. It's laid out clearly by the Commonwealth. It's very comprehensive. It takes a lot of our principals' time. It takes a lot of our teachers' time. And it is, it was built on a supervisory model, turned into what I mean by that is, supervision in terms of the growth of the employee versus a punitive evaluation process. But it is the state evaluation system based on the literature from from a well-known scholar. So what I can suggest is that our teachers are evaluated just like other teachers are in the Commonwealth in that same process. And
I think
so
we're getting
that's
a
what we.
little off topic here.
I just wanted to add very quickly to Mr. Phillips, and then I think we do need, just as a parent with children in the district and children who go to a public school, and as a public school educator, I'm sure there are parents out there that the math is confusing. I just sat through parent conferences last evening, and we were joking a little bit about it. But I also wanted to add, as a parent of third graders and fifth graders in our district, that I have found to be very helpful the reflex math and the ALEX program that you're using, and I am sure not just my children are benefiting from that. And in addition, Mr. Phillips, there's I lived through it, a very rigorous evaluation for public school teachers that involves peer collaboration, action research, formal observation, and we all have a PVOS score and are very, very aware of where we stand every year, not only every day in the classroom, but in regards to scores.
Thank you. So, Dr. Katona, thank you very much for your presentation this evening. Mr. Winters, last question?
No, thank you. I just wanted to go back to transportation. One just comment or recommendation is, since we did get a lot of feedback from some of the parents related to students that are not in Methacton, that maybe Dr. Harney can pull in a fifth community member or whatever number it is that has a private school transportation.
I think that's a fair recommendation. Mr. Harney, thank you.
Absolutely.
One interesting thought here is, if the state keeps a PVAS, I think you mentioned, as far as the rating of a teacher, can we see the ratings and how they fall? Are we in the upper
They do not rate teachers on PVAS. The teachers get an overview of the cohorts of students that they've had, but there is no rating of teachers. It's information for us to use.
The 7 years I've been here, I assume all our teachers are very good teachers, but anybody that has had a job for a period of time, if you had 100 employees, I think everybody could say that they know they can identify out of 100 people, 1 or 2 employees at least that aren't carrying their weight at a given time. And my point is, how are we identifying if there's a problem teacher? Are we identifying where the curriculum is actually the problem, not the teacher? I mean,
Mr. Phillips, I think all those questions are part of a system that's been in place for a number of years. If there's issues with teachers, we put them on improvement plans. That information, and we deal. That's a typical process, as you would find in any industry. We put people on improvement plans, and we work towards addressing their matters. If they comply with the things that are needed to be successful, then they come off the improvement plan and they move through the process. If they don't, then there's other challenges ahead of those employees. So I got to say that we're following all the proper processes associated with making sure that not only our curriculum, but our resources and our teachers are being provided for the district in the best possible manner that we can afford. So I do appreciate all the questions this evening. We do have quite a bit of other items. I just want to let the board know that while it's not on the agenda for a presentation, I would like to ask that Mr. Sesnovic come forward now as part of the presentation's schedule, so that we can deliver information associated with the SRO program. But before he begins, I also want to make mention to the board and to the public to look at item number 13E. 13E shall read as I'm stating. It should read, authorize the administration to proceed with the preparation and solicitation of bids for remaining field project at a cost not to exceed $16,500. That information has been updated for your reference and is referenced in the handout that's at your table. It was what was discussed at the work session last week. So the agenda item is up as I just read for approval. Okay, and now
Wait, before we get into this presentation, I'm just wondering why we're getting a presentation that's not on the agenda.
we have an action item on the agenda, and it would be item number. It's action item number 13D, School Resource Officer. I think it's important that while this is a matter for you to vote on, you need information. We said that we would come back after our conversation at the work session with additional information. Mrs. Novik has that information to provide to you as members of the board, and then we can move forward.
Thank you. All right, so good evening. Tonight we plan to provide you with an update to the School Resource Officer project and seek guidance from the board on next steps. On November 16th, vendors presented their solutions to the district administration. Following the presentations, the administrative committee identified 3 vendors that met the specifications identified in the RFI in regards to program design, qualifications of personnel, and cost. What we passed out to you is a cost summary for 2 possible program structures. Page 1 provides a cost summary for the first program structure of 1 full-time SRO, 1 part-time SRO, and augmented services. As you can see, option 1 provides a design whereby the Lower Providence Township Police provides the full-time SRO service, and one of the 2 private vendors provides the part-time SRO and augmented services for an estimated cost of $224,764. Option 2 on page 1 provides the same program structure of 1 full-time SRO, 1 part-time SRO, and augmented services. However, all services would be provided exclusively by one of the 2 private vendors for an estimated cost of $122,064. On page 2, a cost summary is provided for a second program structure. This structure is similar to our current level of services, whereby there would be 2 full-time SROs and augmented services provided exclusively by one of the 2 private vendors for an estimated cost of $149,924. Based on information before you, we are seeking guidance from the board whether to move forward with program structure 1, option 1, with Lower Providence. That concludes my update.
We'll just give the board a few minutes to read over the document, and then we'll open the floor to some questions.
Yep, understood.
Could you repeat exactly what it is that you're looking for from us here? So you want us to direct you on which course we should be taking? Which program design?
We're seeking guidance from you tonight whether to move forward with program 1, option 1, with Lower Providence or not. We need direction from you whether or not that is something the board would like us to continue to entertain. We feel confident that we have two qualified vendors that meet all the programmatic needs as identified in RFI with very different cost structures that I put before you. So we need to understand where the board sits on whether or not we still should proceed down the path of Lower Providence Township.
Can I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, first of all, I don't appreciate the committee in doing this, but I don't know how I could possibly absorb this in this time frame, getting the RFI also today. So I'm not going to look to move forward on giving you a decision today personally, but I do have some questions and doing some research in the last couple of days. So if there was a outsourced portion of if we went with option one, obviously we still have the connection to Lower Providence, but if we went with option two, what is the information flow between the vendor and the Lower Providence and the state police? So how does their sharing information? Do we lose sharing of information, or does that continue?
Well, there is an advantage to having a Lower Providence Township police officer here, and that information sharing as what they are seeing out in the community and what they're seeing here in the school is definitely an added value to having a Lower Providence Township police officer. However, we would continue to have Lower Providence Township Police be a part of all of our Safe Schools meetings like they are now. The same with the state police, and we would continue to do information sharing very much as we have it in place today.
Okay. So if there was, we'll go soft, a tic-tacking incident that happened over the weekend, or something that the state police or the local police is aware of, would that be shared back with the school if it was relevant to our students?
Yeah, I think the relationship between Lower Providence and Methacton is still very strong. It will always be very strong. We are partners in this community. So I don't see any erosion of communications that would impact us or them.
Okay. The part-time coverage, the part-time SRO, refresh my memory on the additional hours between the second page and the part-time portion.
The second page and the part-time portion, I just give me some more clarity, please, on your question.
Yeah,
Are you looking at
we're saying
a
part-time SRO today is supporting the full-time is at the high school. The part-time is at Arcola and supporting Lower Providence Elementaries. And that part-time means what from that perspective?
That part-time would act in similar capacities that it is today, but as a reduced cost due to the budgetary constraints that this whole program is
So it would be less hours than the current program?
That's accurate. Yeah. However, that's why we provided you with program design number 2, which provides a commensurate level of services to full-time SRO officers, one that would serve here at the high school, primarily located, the other one primarily located at Arcola Skyview, in the same capacity as today, with the additional augmented services. So we felt it important for you not only to see the design relative to what we put out in the RFI, which was one full-time and one part-time. After we were confident in the numbers provided to us, we realized underneath the $200,000 limit, we could have the same level of service that we have today if we had an exclusive vendor-only contract.
Okay. And then the last question, Troy, I appreciate that. And it's not, it's from a perspective of the consistency of the vendor SRO. Is it a dedicated individual that would be most likely some retired police officer or something like that, or would be a rolling individuals in and out of the school provided by a service?
That's a good question, and that was a concern of ours as well. And both of the vendors that we put forward were measured on consistency of personnel and backups. So in terms of a hiring process, we would have full flexibility and ability to choose the appropriate candidate for Methacton, or candidates, if so desired. At that point, those people would be primarily located here. They would be Methacton school resource officers. In the RFI, we also made sure that there were 1 to 2 backups that we would know and also approve of that would act in the capacity of that role if that individual took a vacation day, sick, or what have you. So yes, in terms of program consistency of personnel, we feel very confident in both of those vendors providing an individual that met those needs and specifically are exclusive to Methacton.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
So in option 1 here, are you saying the first part, the full-time SRO would be Lower Providence? The part-time, it says vendor provided. Have you established who the vendor is, or are we saying that it could be either vendor 1 or vendor 2 from the previous presentation?
That's accurate. So what we did here to provide you with cost analysis, and we still would like to do some further due diligence on vetting out vendor 1 and 2 to make the most appropriate decision. We took the highest estimated cost of both of those individuals and put them on this matrix here. So the option 1 is Lower Providence would provide the full-time SRO, and then the other services relative to the part-time SRO and augmented services, security guards, would be provided by an outside private vendor.
And when will we find out the names of these vendors?
Yes, at the time we would be ready to award a contract. Again, you have 2 competing vendors here that are providing pricing information to us in a public format that not necessarily has that marketed out for their public consumption. So at the time we would identify and make a recommendation for a specific vendor that we felt most appropriate to fulfill these roles. You would be informed who that vendor was.
So before we would vote?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then just as a hypothetical scenario, I guess, take, for example, the incident that just happened last week at the high school.
Sure.
Something like that occurs, and we have now replaced one of our Lower Providence officers with, or say we've gone completely outside of Lower Providence officers, and we have this private firm. How differently would a scenario like that unfold with these other contractors in here?
Those scenarios are not based on any specific individual or company or vendor. We have internal procedures that we follow relative to safety. So depending on the scenario you mentioned last week, the same procedure would have unfolded just as it did last week. We would, follow the appropriate protocols to inform the right law enforcement individuals to come and assist in that, and people would respond accordingly.
Okay, I think, I guess we just want some reassurance that that safety and security is not going to be compromised. My understanding is that there were multiple police cars here on Friday, and it sounds like that outcome would still have been the same. It just would have been a matter of who initiated contacting the police?
We always initiate it.
Okay.
So it would be district administration. Well, let me just, depending on the situation, anyone could call 911. I just want to make that abundantly clear, and that's something that we emphasize. However, we initiated it, it would have followed that same process. So you saw multiple law enforcement presence because you had 2 sets responding, state police and Lower Providence, collaboratively helping us through that scenario. And that would be the same moving forward.
Okay, and
If I could
Go
just
ahead.
add to that, so to get it as clear as possible, while the process is in place, the protocol may be a little different. So it would become a jurisdiction matter, and the state police, if they're not able to respond at the times, for example, maybe they don't have a car close by, then we would ask them for the assistance of Lower Providence, and they would have to issue Lower Providence a request to do that. So it's a matter of whose jurisdiction is whose, and Lower Providence maybe being closer to the high school would be summoned by the state police rather than directly from a call from one of our SROs. I think that was more clearly articulate what I think you're trying to ask.
so then what happened on Friday was basically the RSRO was able to initiate, or a scenario similar to that?
Well, our SRO contacted Lower Providence while Mr. Sosnovic was contacting the state police. So all this occurred simultaneously, and that's why you saw the resources from both entities. But in the future, it would be likely that we would have the relationship with the state police, and we would then determine on that call whether or not they're able to service us in the period of time that we need their service, or that they would summon Lower Providence, who might be in a closer proximity.
So there are additional steps that come into play?
It's an additional call.
Okay. And then finally, looking at these two scenarios side by side, I know that the public can't see these documents that we have in front of us, but there is a huge price discrepancy here. Do we have more information or clarification on why? I mean, we're looking at a $100,000 difference between having a Lower Providence officer here and a non-Lower Providence officer part-time versus having just another vendor. So do we have any further information as to why there is such a huge discrepancy in these prices?
Oh, I saw him reach for the microphone, so I didn't know if you're going to jump in. The greatest cost driver is personnel cost, and it's evident in the side-by-side comparison. We had 3 vendors provide additional SRO services, all of them commensurate with one another, thus indicating that they are providing an industry average or cost for these services. The cost difference between what you see here in option 1 and option 2 really boils down to personnel costs afforded to us through Lower Providence.
Okay, I guess I'm having a hard time seeing how the two options are equivalent when you've got the SRO full-time with an outside vendor being 1/3 of the cost of having a Lower Providence officer. So I'm having a hard time seeing how the two can be considered equivalent.
One way to think about it is we're paying for a lot of training experience in a Lower Providence officer that will never come to reality in our situation. So they're trained to go in to deal with...
So we're paying for somebody who's kind of overqualified for the position is what it sounds like.
They are going to have to deal with a bank robbery on our school.
Let's hope not.
Yeah, that's part of the training. Yeah.
And the other part is, and the employees for Lower Providence are part of a collective bargaining unit, and that in itself tends to drive cost in of its own. And so the members in these other organizations are not.
Could I make a point to Mr. Boardman that I just didn't want to have lost, or the board think anything differently? The individual that we would look to put in this role, if it's not a Lower Providence officer, will meet a minimum set of qualifications and also provide a minimum level of clearances that would make them similar but not the same as a Lower Providence officer here. And some of the minimum qualifications is an Act 120 certified individual, which has gone through the Municipal Police Academy. They would have to potentially have active military or police service. So we are looking for someone that has that depth of knowledge and life experience in a role as a police officer to fulfill these roles. And that's why it was important for us to make sure 2 vendors were put forward, that we have full discrepancy on the decision to pick who is going to fulfill this role if we go down that path.
Thanks. Simply put, the difference between them price-wise is pension and salaries. I mean, government versus private entity. I mean, government costs a lot more to do things than private entities. One question I had was on the car. Are they providing a car, or is this their personal car, or how's those numbers? What are we getting for those numbers?
For the estimated 2,600, that is the mileage that would transpire between building to building. The car piece has to be a little bit more vetted out. We have one vendor that is willing to provide us a car at no cost in the program. The other vendor, I have to gain additional clarity whether they're providing their car would be either a personal vehicle or a company-owned lease vehicle.
Yeah, liabilities and so on. I mean, that's something that Dave and the administration have to figure out as far as them with their personal vehicles. But far as them providing a car, if they want to provide one that they're not charging us, well, I'm fine with that. But if it's coming down to that, for instance, in your design 2, where it's $5,200 a year, reaching out to one of the car dealerships, whether it's Dodge or Ford, find out if they have a car they could donate to the district. I mean, there's other, $5,200 buys you a lot of car every year, is my point.
Right. And what that is, again, that was the minimum estimated amount of gas and other things that would go into that car. Them not knowing what the mileage is for the program and how often this SRO is going to be going between buildings and all of that, they just provided a minimum estimate. And honestly, the math was quite simple in terms of I just took the $50 per week minimum and just multiplied it by 52 to just get some estimate of what that might look like on an annual basis. That might drastically reduce depending on the travel between buildings, or it might be around that number based on, again, what the program service is.
And if these 2 different vendors are very close and competitive number-wise, there's another thing to sweeten the pot for us of them throwing the car in. I mean, that's, what I'd be looking for. Far as the concern of how we would react to something, I would think, going to the incident last week, our first call is going to be to either county through 911 or to Skip Back Barracks, which they have a direct number if you happen to know it, or to the LP, which a lot of them would prefer us to just call 911 because it goes through those proper response channels. Far as an SRO being from LP or a vendor, the only way it gets any quicker is if they're actually there when it happens, and they can all make the same phone call. I mean, it's, but I'm not so concerned about that. I mean, it's those first responders, they're the first ones run into the fire, regardless. And my last question is, out of these scenarios, what is the recommendation of the administration to the board?
Well, a recommendation at this time is to get direction on whether or not we're going to be considering option one. Option one is that which would mean that we'd have a full-time officer and a part-time officer, which would equate to continuing our relationship with Lower Providence. If that scenario based on cost and the available services, meaning there are less hour services in totality compared to what we have today, then we would need to vet out some additional matters associated with the other two vendors before we come back with a recommendation on which vendor would then fulfill the option 2 that's on the second page.
Okay.
Because that is our ultimate recommendation, to have two full-time officers similar to what we have today. But if the choice is to keep Lower Providence financially, that's why option 1 is available here, because it's not something financially we're going to be able to do. So that's why we need direction, because that direction will allow us to know whether we're speaking with Lower Providence to iron out some details, or we're going out and continuing the vetting process with the two private vendors.
What I'm looking at is, from a board member's perspective, is a recommendation from the administration. Because I don't work with LP or potentially a vendor, I don't look at the budget the same way you do. I mean, I'm not the one running the district as far as the superintendent seat. And that's where I would like a recommendation from you, or somebody in the administration, which way that would best steer the district, knowing what our budget issues are, what our needs are in the buildings. Because I'm not in the building every day. I don't see everything that the administration sees. So I'm looking for a recommendation from the administration on which way to go to help me with my decision. If we're getting a quality product, which from what you're saying, between these vendors and LP, it's basically apples to apples, and the cost is such a great difference, a third of the cost. Well, I mean, it seems pretty simple. Why spend 2 or 3 times as much to get the same service? So the only way I could fine tune that is if the administration says, look, this is where our comfort level is, and this is where I see us being. And I'd like to know what that recommendation is.
So from the committee's perspective, we can get comparable services under each option.
That's correct.
And program design 2 is getting us more time to cover more events and things.
Program design 2 maintains the current level of service in which we have in our district right now.
Okay.
Adds to it.
And adds to it.
Yeah.
Thank you. And it adds to it because of the augmented services.
Right. Okay. So in all 3 columns here, it involves a vendor, right?
That's correct.
So any one of the recommendations you're putting forward involves a vendor. So there has to be a certain level of comfort that the vendors can do a job because they're in all 3 options here, right?
Correct.
You also stated that we can have some hiring influence. So if we decide that we want a retired police officer, we can put that in there, correct?
That's accurate. We have full influence.
Okay. So if we go ahead with an outside vendor and we say we would like those people to be retired police officers, in reality, we would be picking up police officers with more years' experience than what we would get from the LP. because they would have served their full term and retired, correct?
Yeah, depending on when they left service, that statement could be accurate.
Okay. All right. I don't have any more questions.
Okay, just a couple of quick ones. I really do feel that the vendor should provide a car, whether it's part of a fee or it's free. I think it's important that if we have a need for a car to be out on school grounds directing traffic, that it be clearly identified as a vehicle of authority, maybe has the flashing, lights that you can turn on, versus a personal car. I just think there's an additional layer of liability that also comes onto the district if it's a personal car versus the vendor's car. So I feel pretty strongly that whatever solution that we pick, the car should be, a clearly identified vehicle that has some kind of authority if there is a situation that warrants it out on the grounds.
Mr. Dorn, we agree with you on that. That was in the RFI, and we said that we wanted that service. So while Mr. Sosnovic is saying that he has to do some additional homework with one of the two vendors, we also asked for that in the RFI, and we agree with your statement.
Okay. I mean, that would, to me, be an automatic disqualifier if they said no, they've got to use their personal vehicle. I mean, that's just, I just think that that's important. Our current SROs are armed, is that correct?
That's
in
accurate.
the school? Would these SROs in option 2 and option 3 be armed as well?
If it's the will of the board.
From a price perspective, is that
It's the same price.
It's the same price. So, okay. I don't know if the board would know whether that's necessary or not. I would say that if you have them armed now, you'd look for more of the reason not to do it versus keeping the status quo, because that kind of keeps it comparable. But obviously, that just means that all the training and certifications and all the required certifications to maintain a license to carry in that particular instance need to be checked.
May I address that?
Often, yeah.
So we had requested in the RFI SRO full-time, armed, unarmed, and variations of part-times and stuff. With that said, both of the vendors that we are comfortable moving forward said that any of the individuals that we would potentially seek would hold all of those certifications, irrelevant if it was if that person was armed or unarmed. To them, it doesn't make a difference. That person's still going to meet a high qualification standard and maintain those certifications and what have you throughout their tenure here with us at Methacton. It's the board's choice whether or not to arm them or not. The cost differential is it's not there.
But the board didn't have a choice when we did the SRO program. The police officers come armed, right? So now we've got to vote. Could we tell the Lower Providence guys to come without arms?
I couldn't answer that.
I could say from...
I think not.
No, you cannot.
Basically, the board came down to that they wanted them armed. There was, and LP's position was that was part of the uniform.
Yeah, I would think so.
It's just like that TV commercial. I'm a monitor, security monitor. It's the bank's getting robbed. Yeah, you're getting robbed. So if you're going to have, at the time with the board, if you're going to have somebody there is in a presence, and anybody can call 911, but it's stopping it from going any further, and that was the concern.
Right. You never know when a wackadoo's going to show up. I guess that was it that I had. I think you asked my other question.
Just a couple quick questions. Some of them have been answered already. When we talked about the requirement of the individual, the RFI does state, and I think you mentioned part of this, that a minimum of 2 years experience is one of the following: a police officer, an active duty military, honorably discharged, probation officer, or correction officer. So that is a requirement of any of the individuals, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and we could, as Mr. Boardman stated, we could pick amongst them, that if we did truly want to say we want someone who has been a police officer in the past, that is our ability?
Yes, we define the individual and their qualifications.
Okay. The question versus armed versus unarmed was answered. In terms of the recommendation of the administration based off of, what we see here, there's a substantial cost difference between I'll go with, option 1 and actually option 3, I guess would be on the second page here. Normally, if your recommendation is something which is going to cost significantly more, there's a rationale behind what is the additional quality or the addition in service that Lower Providence would provide above and beyond the vendors in order to make that recommendation. And I haven't quite heard those words come from yourself or Dr. Zerbe. I'm just curious, what would make your recommendation option 1 here?
We didn't recommend option 1. We didn't make any recommendation. We're seeking guidance here from the board whether or not to continue to move forward and look at Lower Providence as a potential option. We did not put forward any recommendation.
Okay. The first time it was stated, the 3 options were put out there, and it sounded like, and again, maybe I heard this wrong, but it sounded like the preferred was the option 1, which is highlighted in a different color. That is not meant to be that way?
No, what I read was based on information before you. We're seeking guidance from the board whether to move forward with program structure 1, option 1, with Lower Providence, because Lower Providence in itself, when included in these program designs, drastically changes this cost structure in which we are able to provide those other services. So we need to understand the comfort level with the board and seek guidance from them whether or not we should go with or continue to consider Lower Providence, because that is going to affect our ultimate outcome of vetting those 2 vendors that we've decided and what services they will render.
Okay. My apologies for misunderstanding
that. That's okay.
In terms of one of the comments that Jim made before, with the cost between, why Lower Providence is higher versus the vendor, yes, part of it I believe probably is the government versus a company. The other part I believe would be that for Lower Providence, we're picking up the cost of a police officer for an entire year, whereas a vendor would be charging us for the services we actually need. Would that be?
That's a true statement.
That's a true statement. Another one in terms of, if we wanted to stick with Lower Providence, is at least providing 1 full-time officer, is the familiarity with the officers. We had Sergeant Stead for a while and Officer Nastasi. Now, neither of them are part of the program. And I guess part of my hesitation here is that we really don't have that much control over Lower Providence's choice. And, we had 2 officers before, now we have 2 brand new ones. So it really is the fluctuation of, the officers with what they do in terms of promotions and movements, where we'd have a little bit more control, I would think, with the vendors.
That's true, but I do want to highlight that Officer Sherrill and Barber are very good officers and have demonstrated high quality of professionalism and duties since coming underneath Methacton. So I would be remiss not to mention that.
And my daughter would agree with you. She loves Officer Barber. So, and the last question, I guess maybe it's not necessarily a question, but it does state, and I think that Dr. Zerbe mentioned this in terms of the car, that as part of the RFI, it does say that the vendors to provide the vehicle. That's not a question. That is definitely part of the RFI, correct?
Yes.
It's just on how we're going to work that out.
Yeah, and again, I just need to seek clarity on one of the 2 vendors. One did fully confirm that a vehicle would be provided for the SRO.
Okay. Thank you very much.
So on the face of it, if we're just looking at numbers, it's pretty clear that we would want to spend less money, and we could. But in the case of the vendors, the service that they would provide, would it be the same as what Lower Providence has provided? Are there things that Lower Providence provides to us that are more than we need, therefore we could forego some of those services? And have these vendors provided the same kind of services to other school districts? And do we have reports on what they have done?
So relative to, let's say, job responsibilities, as your first part of your question, what we did as an administrative team was to assess what exact things that we were having now afforded to us, and what areas and gaps that we might like to see filled, and then that was what comprised that RFI. So in terms of all three, Lower Providence, and then the two additional vendors providing proposals, it's the impression then that they're going to fulfill all of those needs, both ones that we've identified that we'd like to continue to remain, and the ones where we saw potential gaps in. So that's spelled out in the RFI, and that's our preferred future. Regarding reference checking of the two vendors, I called all of the vendors, or I don't want to say all, I called the bulk majority of of the references that they had listed on there. So they were requested to provide 3 references at a minimum, and then most of them provided additional references. So I went above and beyond the 3 in calling, the references and doing checks. They do all have experience in schools. One has experience in the private school space more exclusively, and the other one has experience in both private and public school space.
For the same types of duties that we have I know of Philadelphia schools that have security guards, and their job is a whole different kind of job than what our school resource officer is.
Sure. Neither of the two vendors currently offer SRO services relative to public schools. However, the way the companies are structured and expanding, those companies would be able to provide, we believe, the candidate and service that we are looking for within this RFI. You're welcome.
Last week we did talk about the marked car, so I knew there was a marked car. But last week I remember hearing school districts, and I thought I even wrote them down. I remember hearing Neshaminy. I remember hearing public schools.
Yes.
Okay, I must have misunderstood you. I just thought you said now.
But Brenda asked specifically related to a specific service, which was SRO. So they have operations in terms of security guards. One vendor offers what is known as a school police officer to private schools. So I was just being very clear as to what my statement was.
I got you.
They do have experience in schools.
And I don't want to read more into your body language or your statement, but I got the impression it was kind of like, do you want us to keep looking at option 1? Really? So maybe I read that more in, and we're trying to be, I look at this as we are always going to have a relationship with Lower Providence. They take care of our community very well. And I think we're all trying to be PC here, but maybe I read it into it too much. And I appreciate all the questions that we're asking, because it is confusing. It's not confusing. We just want to make sure we're doing the best that we can do. But
that's exactly right, and that's the work that that's what we've been doing for the last several months, is trying to provide the appropriate information for the board to consider. We did make a decision back in the budgeting process that we were reducing the dollars associated with this type of service, and as a result, that's the information that we have here for you this evening. It's not unlike what you're seeing in other school districts where they've changed their relationship with their local municipality and have gone to these types of services. So I must say that it is certainly, I would be remiss to say that, Lower Providence has been a great partner with the Methacton School District for a number of years, and it is important for us to recognize that. But I can tell you that with the sheets in front of you and the information associated with it, it does challenge us to consider, are those services worth approximately in the neighborhood of $102,000 more? And then and as superintendent of schools, it's my job to make sure that you have this information so that together we can make a decision going forward, and we can give Mr. Sosnovic the direction he needs in order to make sure that we tie all the loose ends up and come back with an ultimate recommendation for the board's consideration.
Just real quick, currently we have, the baseline to compare currently is 2 full-time SROs, right?
That's correct.
Plus augmented services.
Not at the level as defined.
Not from the SRO, but through other mechanisms.
Just for varsity school events currently at the high school.
So either option 2 or option 1 on page 2 would give us, option 2 gives us the 2 full-time SROs plus an enhanced set of augmented services, if I read it correctly.
That's very accurate.
Okay. So we get more out of it, just
that's
plain and simple. Okay.
I have one other clarification that I just want to make sure I understood you correctly. Of the 2 vendors that we're looking at that are not Lower Providence, neither one of them is currently offering SRO services in any school district?
Private schools, yes. Public schools, no.
So in a private school environment, they are classified as SROs?
They are known as, through the Safe Schools PD designation of a school police officer, which is basically the same thing as what we're calling an SRO.
Okay, the way that this was presented last week, I was under the impression that these vendors were providing SRO services in other districts, but I'm hearing that that's not the case then.
That is not the case. One vendor is providing that service to private schools. The other one has a significant footprint in other security services in a number of public schools locally and regionally, and is expanding their service offering to include SRO services.
Okay.
But they're working in school districts today, both vendors are working in school districts today.
Yes, both vendors are working in schools today.
I'd like to get people's feedback and perspective on being comfortable giving guidance.
Do you want to wait until we get that point in the agenda and then that way it's in the form of a motion or anything like that?
It's a good question. Are we going to do full motion and vote on it? Is it listed that way on the agenda?
Well, the agenda does not specify what the actual action is. So it talks about, as presented. So this evening, what we are looking for is direction from the board. So typically, as the board has done in the past, you can certainly vote to give me direction, or you can have the discussion about that direction for us without taking a formalized vote. Because really what we're asking for is, shall we proceed with securing additional information and contract language for SRO services under which option, and with or without Lower Providence as a vendor? I mean, that's ultimately the question that is being asked this evening, and I can reword that specifically and have it ready for the action if the board so desires.
To your point, in the past, we've given you guidance on different things.
You have?
And so, since we aren't going to be voting on a contract or anything like that now, it seems reasonable to proceed that way. Paul?
Yeah, I don't know if there's that on asking the question, but I just need a little more time to absorb this personally. I would like to see if we could push a vote on this until December 5th. I don't know if that 2 weeks is, less than 2 weeks actually, is going to make a big difference in our communication to Lower Providence or to these vendors to be set up. I'm sure Lower Providence could provide us, I'm not sure, but I think if we wanted to ask for a month extension because of that, but I do not feel comfortable absorbing all this on the fly. Not all of it, but some of it is recent information just provided today. So I would like to.
I'd like to second that. I echo almost word for word what Paul is saying here.
What, I think the big thing here is I wanted some direction from the superintendent, but I'll put it this way instead. If the board gave you direction to go and give us a comparison and contract and between the two vendors, would you have a problem with us going in that direction? Would you be comfortable with us going that direction? Would there be any issues with the district if we broke away from Lower Providence, in your eyes?
As part of the committee's work on this process, I can tell you that we are having this discussion only because there are 3 vendors, Lower Providence being one, and 2 private vendors being the others that can provide the level of service to provide the program personnel for SRO services and augmented services as we presented here this evening. So I'm fine with either direction. I think that we just need that direction because the path we take is different and the availability of the types of services are going to be different if we keep one vendor in, meaning Lower Providence, and that's the ultimate issue.
So I have no problem going forward and giving you that direction. And when you go forward and get us that information and you present it to us, it's not like if we tell you to do that tonight, we're making the decision to break away from Lower Providence. Right. So I don't think there's any harm in going forward to find out that information. And if anything, it'll clarify a lot of things that we may have questions about tonight.
Scott?
I'm okay to give my opinion tonight.
I'm okay to give my opinion tonight as well.
I don't consider it an opinion, and I don't think this is something that I want to do as a board member. The recommendation should come from the superintendent, not from me.
Okay, sorry. I didn't.
Andrea?
I'm okay with tonight.
Okay. I am as well. So if we start down with, how many people are okay with giving the direction to look at the outside vendor? So either option 2 or option 1. Yeah. So
I would say to hold off until that agenda item comes up later in the meeting. That way we can do this officially.
Okay, we'll write up something and do it that way.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That ends the reports and recognition of guests and scheduled speakers. We then move on to reports from the committees.
All right, in terms of reports to the committees, the first one up would be the Finance Committee. Mr. Ryan?
Thank you, and I apologize if my voice goes out. I haven't been feeling that well lately. The Finance Committee met on November 9th, 2016. Meeting was called to order at 6:31 p.m. All members of the committee were in attendance, as well as Mr. Klaus and Dr. Zerbe. Also in attendance were 2 members of the Major Mastro audit firm. In terms of the first item up for discussion that evening was the monthly reports. We reviewed the list of bills, the Treasury report, and the monthly departmental and operational reports. There were several questions regarding the list of bills and the Treasury report. There are some outstanding questions that are still out to administration regarding the SRO payment for the last month. It was a little bit higher than it has been in the past, as well as a budgetary item, which is an other expense, which is having expenses run through it. The second item up was the budget transfers. There are 5 budget transfers this month. There were no issues with these transfer requests based off a review of the committee, and they will be up for a full board vote this evening. The next item up, actually was the first item that we reported on that evening, was the annual audit review. The audit team from Major and Mastro went over Methacton's audit report for the year ending June 30, 2016. It was noted, as Mr. Klaus mentioned at the work session, that we did receive a clean report and there were no material findings listed in the report. The audit team also reported that the review of certain federal awards and grants did not contain any material findings. In terms of our net position, Methacton has a negative $108 million net position. This is a result of the district's proportionate share of the net pension liability and deferred pension amounts. This is in accordance with the new GASB statement number 68, which was put in last year. Let's see, in terms of the year ended June 30th, 2016, our revenues exceeded our expenditures by the amount of $217,000 roughly. This resulted in an increase in our total general fund balance, which ended the fiscal year at $7.8 million. It is important to note that the unassigned fund balance for the general fund was $6.8 million, or 7% of the total general fund expenditures. The audit report will be up for a vote this evening, and if passed, will be posted to the district website this evening. The administration, or the Finance Committee, also asked the administration to complete a year-end analysis, identifying particular line items with significant variances to budget. The administration agreed to complete this analysis by the January-February timeline. The next item was the budget timeline. There wasn't any significant changes prior to the meeting, but it was discussed that a Finance Committee meeting will be added for the month of December. The meeting will take place on December 6th, 2016 at 6:30 p.m. The purpose of this meeting is to have PFM come in to present some possible financing options. And finally, the budgetary direction. The Finance Committee was presented with draft of a potential budgetary considerations in terms of the 2017-2018 school year. Also identified were estimated yield of tax revenues at the Act 1 index. The Act 1 index for next year is 2.5%. If you were to raise taxes to the full amount, it would generate $1.7 million. And if we went with historical expenditure increases, it would result in $3.5 million increase, resulting in a potential deficit of $1.8 million. These are just general ballpark numbers, and we will get a preliminary budget in January 2017. It was also unanimously agreed at this point from the Finance Committee that we would like to see a preliminary budget that came in at or below the Act 1 index of 2.5% and that did not contain any PSERs or special education exceptions. Courtesy of the floor was held. Mr. Andrews asked for an update on the wrestling room and questioned the savings potential regarding the high school scheduling report. Mr. Bickelman commented on the budget booklet, that the audit team probably did have some of the variance work already completed for us, and stated that the district should use the competitive bidding instead of the negotiated bidding in terms of any future bond sales. The meeting was adjourned at 8:46 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you. Now on to the Property Committee. Mr. Dorn.
Thank you. The meeting was called to order at 6:01. In attendance was myself, Ms. Aubrey Larson-East, Dr. Zerby, Mr. Fretz, and Mr. Klaus. 4 items were on the agenda. First item was the varsity softball field update. Previously, the board had approved Tomlinson and Baumberger to take over the work that was originally contracted to another vendor. This work was completed on the 7th of November 2016. The work consisted primarily of leveling the infield, filling in the depression in the outfield, leveling the warning track, and aeration and seeding of the field. As I stated, the work was completed. There is a risk that the seed may not germinate completely due to the time of year and the weather. Mr. Fretz is looking into a procurement of turf blankets at a cost of $10,250, which would add a layer of protection and warmth to the fields. This cost would be a claim against our original supplier due to the fact that they didn't perform and made us do this work late in the year. If the seed doesn't germinate and the varsity field is not playable, the administration is looking into contingency plans for the softball season of 2017. Next item on the agenda, we got an update from Mr. Miller from Fadavia, talking about the remainder of the projects that are due to basically complete the field project. Some of the information was in scope, some was not in scope. These projects include swale number 4 revisions, basin number 2 infiltration, landscape revisions, and Mill Road storm parking improvements and buffer improvements. We have an estimate for that work, which will be voted on tonight. During our discussion, we did ask Dr. Zerbe to go back to Fadavia and update their pricing to make sure it included both bid and post-bid services. I believe the post-bid services were missing. The next item, and it should be noted that in the posted minutes, the headings for C and D are switched around. So the next item really was the capital projects design professionals. Mr. Fretz presented a recommendation to the committee to seek proposals to have a design professional or professional firm work with the district for a period of time on the initial set of capital projects so that there is a consistency in bidding and process that takes place. Originally, it was labeled as an architectural firm. We pointed out that it could be a multi-purpose firm. It could be an engineering firm. The first tranche of projects are primarily engineering-based, so they will go back and take a look at the exact needs for this set of services. I think the committee agreed that this type of service would be necessary to augment the amount of work that potentially there will be for the district to do. The last item on the agenda was capital projects recommendation. The committee reviewed the first set of recommendations. We did ask Mr. Fretz and Dr. Zerbe to go back and prioritize the projects and make sure that any projects that's being accelerated faster than the report showed, that it is packaged with the project that is necessitating the acceleration, so that we clearly know as a board that we're doing this work early because it is a precursor to maybe a bigger project that needs to be reviewed. Courtesy of floor, there were no speakers, and we adjourned the meeting at 8:11.
All right, thank you. Moving on to the Education Committee, Ms. Reese.
We met on November 7th. The meeting called to order at 6:30. Everyone was in attendance other than Mr. Sosnovic, who was busy on other district, was occupied with other business for the district, and we had the addition of Ms. Gallagher-Landis. First on the agenda was the state testing data report, which we saw this evening. Second, Dr. Engstad gave us an update on Gifted. The universal screening was administered to all second graders in October, and the results of that will be forthcoming. In addition to the new screening, there have been other revisions to all the identification and testing processes throughout the district. Gifted sport teachers were also trained in IEP writer, and we were all pleased with the Gifted revisions. Thank you. In addition, the next item was the committee approved all the suggested courses brought to the board, and you will see that list as part of the agenda today. 3 of the classes are full-time and the rest are electives, and 2 are innovative new AP courses. So thank you again for all that, all those additions, which is going to be, in my opinion, wonderful for the district. We also discussed next on the agenda, Ms. Gallagher-Landis brought to our attention the under-subscribed courses that are reviewed every year. Some are being removed for the next school year, and that list is also attached on the board agenda. For everyone's information, these under-subscribed courses are consistently monitored. Last on the agenda, as always, was the monthly enrollment data was reviewed. Courtesy of the floor, Mr. Andrews mentioned some of the Skyview scores. He was concerned there are not more meetings in December and wants the district to look at other consolidation ideas. Jennifer Hahn showed excitement for the gifted changes, supports full-day kindergarten, and reminded the district to not only look at class rank when we discuss it in 2017, but also reminded us to look at the weighted courses. We adjourned at 8:08.
All right, thank you. Now moving on to the Policy Committee, Ms. Bria Larson-Neese.
Thank you. The Policy Committee met on November 3rd. The meeting was called to order at 6:30. All committee members were in attendance. We had several policies that had been previously discussed and resulted in 7 policies being brought for a first reading this evening. Policies that are still being discussed in future meetings, we're looking at Policy 207, confidential communication, as well as Policy 824 on maintaining professional adult-student boundaries. Dr. Harney is working with an ad hoc committee on this to develop recommendations on the policy, and we're hoping to see those at our next meeting in January. We also had a brief discussion about class rank and determined that the Education Committee is going to take the lead on this policy if we're going to make any revisions, and we'll take guidance from that committee moving forward. A couple of policies on student searches and student surveys that we're awaiting solicitor feedback on. One of the things that we discussed at the close of our meeting was direction for the committee in the year ahead. We're looking to expand some of our policies to cover the 300 and 400 series more extensively, which is policies on employees and professional employees. So Dr. Zerbe is going to reach out to PSBA to see what recommendations are available for those policies, and we can begin to work on expanding the series. Dr. Zerbe also suggested that the committee begin to review job descriptions in the year ahead so that we can make sure that these are up to date. We had no one present for courtesy of the floor, and the meeting adjourned at 7:55.
All right, thank you. Now on to the IU, Ms. Hackett.
The IU met on November 16th. They had not had a meeting in October since they couldn't have a quorum, so there was a lot of business to be discussed. The meeting was held at the offices of the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network, which is located in the Great Valley Corporate Center, brand-new offices that they have acquired. They are part of the IU, at least they're handled through the IU. The items that we talked about were, we approved a 3-year contract with the Montgomery County Education Association for the period July 1st, 2016 to June 30th, 2019. We accepted the audit by Maley LLP for the year ended June 30th, 2016, which was an unqualified opinion. The year audited resulted in a net change to fund balance of $2.7 million positive. The IU plans to use that surplus to make needed improvements to its early learning center on Main Street in Norristown. And the plan is to save the burden of moving those costs to the school districts because they share in all the IU costs, so they're using last year's surplus for that. We also approved a 1.8% COLA for the Head Start program staff effective July 1st, which is funded through the federal Head Start funds. We received a government relations report. Some of the items were the Pennsylvania budget anticipated a revenue shortfall this year and experience a long-term structural deficit, which could result in having an impact on program spending. The truancy penalties bill was signed into law on November 3rd by the governor. Professional education compliance deadline extension was signed November 2nd. Pension reform efforts failed this year, so if anybody wants to do anything on that in the Pennsylvania legislature, they will need to come up again next year. And Plan Con payments have restarted. The first couple of payments have been made this year. There was also one policy that was rushed through on naloxone, primarily to enable the IU to apply for a grant to cover the initial costs of that drug. That's all. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now on to the North Monco Technical Center.
Mr. Roth attended the meeting and I did not, so he let me know he will give a formal report at the next meeting. I did want to remind the community that the Technical Center has breakfast with Santa on December 10th from 9 to 11. And I also just wanted to remind my fellow board members they are invited to the holiday dinner on December 19th. So if anyone would like to join me for dinner, that would be fantastic. And I will be going to the meeting afterwards, but you don't have to stay for the meeting.
It is a great event, and it's all prepared and served by the students, and I'll be there.
Thank you, and I'm planning on attending again this year. I just have to look at my work schedule and make sure I'm around. Moving on to the student board representatives.
Thank you. So the high school held a mock election on Tuesday, November 1st, run by the AP government students. So all 4 grades participated in registering to vote and then voting for the president, for other federal and state officials, and on referendums. On November 7th, the Methacton Mini-Thon invited the world-famous Harlem Wizards basketball team to participate in a fundraiser game at the high school. The Mini-Thon team sold almost 700 tickets, raising over $6,000. All proceeds go towards funding critical research for pediatric cancer, and the Mini-Thon event at the high school will occur in March. And finally, from November 10th through 12th, the Methacton Theater Company put on its fall play. This year, the production was a modern twist on the Shakespeare classic Romeo and Juliet.
Many Methacton schools, including the elementary school, Skyview, Arcola, had Veterans Day assemblies to honor those who have served for our country. Arcola had its annual science fair for students to show off their projects that they've been working very hard on. And at the high school last week, there was a community service fair held in the library all day where students could talk to representatives from various local charities and sign up for volunteering opportunities. This is the first time that this has been held at the high school, and it seemed to be a great experience for every student that I've talked to. There seemed to be a variety of options, and everyone had a charity that they could connect with at the fair. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And now, do we have somebody covering communications?
No.
Okay. And then, so we'll move right on to the superintendent's report.
Basically, I'd like to let the board know that as per the direction at the last work session, my administration and I have begun working on providing that, putting together the data that we hope to be able to share at our next meeting in December relative to capacity and programming in both in Skyview, Arcola, and the high school, similar to the report that Dr. Angstad presented on the 5 elementary schools this past month. So I just want to keep you apprised of that, so we will hopefully have that report for you on the 5th. And lastly, I just want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving holiday. Let me read the action item before we have people come make public comments on board action items. So it is my recommendation for the action item that is listed currently, 13D should read, Authorize the administration to proceed with securing of a contract for a single private vendor as listed in the program design option that includes 2 full-time officers and augmented services as presented.
All right, thank you. Now we'll open up to public comment on the board action items. Anybody? Brian, why don't you go first?
Brian Earnshaw, Lower Providence. First, a couple questions on the list of bills. There's a $20,000 payment to Jacobson and John for a settlement agreement. Is that a special ed settlement or some other legal settlement?
I can't tell you that at this moment in time, Mr. Earnshaw, but certainly if there are any other list of bills that you have questions on, you can certainly speak into the microphone, ask those questions.
Okay.
And certainly email me those questions. I will get you those responses.
All right, will do. And then the other one's a first student payment for just under $28,000 for routing assistance. And I can email you the other two. I just had payments out of the capital campaign that are not big numbers. Regarding the audit report, I think I read it or heard that there were no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies. Were there any deficiencies in internal control that were communicated to the admin?
There was a management letter that I believe the Finance Committee did receive, as well as management. One of the items was budgetary transfers, and I think that was addressed by the Finance Committee. The other was, I believe, related to separation of duties, which, in my opinion, I believe that the Finance Department, which headed up by myself as Director of Business Services, has addressed that item actually prior to my arrival with the assistance of the assistant or the treasurer. I think that was due perhaps to we had an absence of one employee as well as the absence of the Director of Business Services. So there was some, I'll just say a realignment of duties. Right. So as to eliminate that position in my role now, I will also be taking part to eliminate that, if you will, that weakness.
Okay, great. So there were
two items.
Perfect, thanks.
Yep.
And then I believe you said there was a surplus of about $217,000, roughly. Does that include the $1 million that was taken in from the healthcare consortium reserve?
That's inclusive of the offset and expense of the $1 million.
So if you take that out, to the extent that relates to a prior year, the real operations for the last fiscal year probably were operating at a deficit. Fair to say?
That would be fair to say.
Okay. And then what is the balance of that reserve that's still held?
I don't know that at this time.
That's something the board might want to look at. I remember when this came up, there was a lot of discussion about the existence of this reserve. It kind of came out of nowhere. It's really off-balance sheet cash of the district.
And I think we had that at the Finance Committee this month. We had some discussion related to that, and I did report that we'll be including that on finance reports
that was
in
kind
the
of the
future.
intention when this came up, we reported.
No, actually, it certainly was conversed, and we said that we will provide that information.
Okay. All right, thank you. And then regarding the SRO program, listening to the discussion, I find it extremely odd, as I think other board members did, that the administration is not making a recommendation regarding the involvement of Lower Providence. And I'm trying to think as to why. And I can't really come up with anything. It seems on its face from the discussion tonight that given the cost differential and the lack of a service differential, it's not that hard of a decision. I realize that there's the history with Lower Providence and their involvement, and I don't know if there's pressure being put on by Lower Providence. I know that they have sent out a letter encouraging the public to attend this meeting tonight. So it just seems odd to me that the administration is not making a recommendation, and I think the board should continue to press that they do so. I think I heard somebody say that the admin lives with this day in, day out, and will have to live with this, so I think that's an important input that should be considered. And then regarding the additional amounts on the Fields project, any progress in determining what this thing has cost us to date and comparing to budget or anything like that? I know that's something you would say you were working on before.
Yep, that report's in progress. It's certainly not complete, otherwise it would have been shared with the board and we would have...
Timing estimate or anything? I mean, you're about to embark on a major capital projects, and I would hope there's some sort of mechanism to track what we're spending and against estimates to see kind of how we're doing with this. And how we're
Mr. Earnshaw, there's no question that the mechanisms are in place to track what we're spending, but there's a narrative that's associated with that mechanism. I can provide the board tomorrow and anyone the dollars, but it doesn't tell the story about where those dollars and why they were used and for what purpose. And so the narrative takes a little bit of time, and there's only a few people within the organization, primarily me, that know all the history associated with all the spending associated with that.
Normally a capital project spending report, there's no narrative. It's kind of, here's what we spent, here's what we budgeted. So that's all. Thank you.
Yep. That's not the case for what we've been providing the board historically for this particular project.
Okay.
Anybody else? John?
John Andrews, Lower Providence. Have a few items. One of the courses being added is AP Capstone, and I know what English is, math is, but I guess I'd like a little description of what is AP Capstone program. Maybe I should have gotten that before the meeting, but it just stood out to me that the public doesn't know what AP Capstone is. Anyone willing to tackle that?
Dr. Catoni, you're welcome to. Just so everyone knows, we've had this discussion not only at the Education Committee, but Dr. Catoni presented the same information at the work session last week. But Dr. Catoni, would you please answer the gentleman's question?
I can tell you what the relevance of the proposed course is and what that encompasses. The course is meant to equip students with skills to analyze and evaluate information with accuracy and precision in order to craft and communicate evidence-based arguments. They will explore real-world issues from multiple perspectives and consider varied points of view to develop deep understanding of complex issues and topics to make connections between those issues in their everyday lives. It involves experiencing the issues through reading articles, listening to speeches, broadcasts, experiencing artistic and literary works, allows students to appreciate diversity and become successful leaders in a dynamic global society. The capstone has two pieces to it. One is a seminar, which is taken 1 year, and AP research, which is taken the subsequent year. Students who receive a 3 or higher, Ms. Gallagher-Landis, in 4 or more
in the 2
AP courses and 4 others, receive a special diploma upon graduation.
Sounds like that might be a bachelor's in something. Thank you very much. With regard to the trips, you all know that I speak up about the trips to the Rockies for the high school ski club. And I think the Arcola Intermediate School ski/snowboard club going to Smuggler's Notch, which is has a lot of expert courses. I think that's pretty aggressive for people of that age. I understand they have hotel space at fancy places like that, but I think that's pretty aggressive for children of that age. With regard to the turf blanket thoughts of improving seed germination at the varsity softball field, do we have any report as to whether we yet have seed germination there? I guess that would be for Mr. Fretz, who's not here. With regard to the list of bills, at Arcola, there was some ceiling problems discovered a few months ago. And ahead of spending $4,350 to repair the ceiling, there's also a bill for Arcola Auditorium investigation for $8,800. You know, we talk about soft costs of the renovations project, soft costs of maybe 15% without going into a bond issue. Here's a case of 200% for soft costs. And I think that points out to me that the district does not have its own engineer, and we're paying the price for that. That's what I have for action items. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, Candy?
Candy Alaba, Eagleville. After last week's meeting, and I asked Troy a few questions, I did a little research on my own about SROs, and I know from in the past, a number of school districts in the county have brought in trained professionals to protect their schools. Now, Lower Providence was brought in to the school district on a grant. And when the grant started to expire, the school district picked up the money. And in the meantime, the police departments, their salaries have gone up. Now, I don't believe for 1 minute that Lower Providence would not defend any of our schools in this school district. If there was a good relationship before the program, there will continue to be a good relationship. My only concern is we're putting an SRO in 2 schools. We still have 5 other schools, if you're worried about protection, that are going to be left wide open. And anything, this day and age, anything can happen anywhere for whatever reason. I just looked into the advance in security firms across the country and did a little research, and I do happen to know 2 retired police officers who went into working in schools because they had the experience. This is getting to be very common across the country because as a resident in Lower Providence that pays taxes, I look at it, these officers were hired to protect the whole township. And you're taking 2 officers off the street and put them in the schools. They've done a wonderful job. They've made friends. Sergeant Stead was promoted to sergeant, which was a very nice thing. But I don't know, nobody's told me exactly how much Worcester is putting in as a township who is being, their schools were being protected by the police. I know this was a dispute in the past about them not paying their fair share. And I also remember the last time the contract came up and the former police chief, Carroll, came in and spoke, and he also said, even though the officers are in the buildings, if there would be an emergency in the township that was all hands on deck, they would have to leave, which leaves our schools unprotected. Now, I don't know exactly what's in the bids. I know what Troy presented and what I've seen. The requirements in these security firms or security resource officers are getting very strict. These guys have to, or men or women, excuse me, to take these jobs have a lot of qualifications they have to pertain to. They have to have knowledge. They have to have law enforcement knowledge. My only concern, and my son had this when he was at Methacton, when the SRO was in the building, if the SRO was in the east wing and there was a problem in the west wing. That's a pretty good hike from one end of the building to the other. So, yeah, and as far as the incident the school district had last week, I commend the school district. The school district has an emergency preparedness program in place. It's been in place for a long time. A few years ago, a presentation was done at a school board meeting when Dr. Quinn was still here to let the public know what the school district does in case of an emergency. There was 3 people in the audience. And it was very informative, and it was very comforting to know that the school district was on top of things. And they had a film which they did drills with the Lower Providence Police and what would happen in each building. I would suggest maybe the board next, in the beginning of the new year, has another emergency preparedness presentation. So, and the parents show up at a meeting and see this. Because I think it's time to renew or let people know what's going on. But I have to commend it from the sounds of things, everything worked, and it worked exactly the way it was supposed to. So I want to commend the school district for that. So thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. All right, let's move on. Excuse me. All right, moving right along. May I have a motion to approve the board minutes of the work session held on October 18th and the regular meeting held on the 25th? Second. Any comment? All those in favor? Opposed? I didn't see your hand, Jim. Okay, thank you. You're hiding it. All right, that approves. Thank you. Fiscal items.
Mr. Klaus?
As was presented to the board at the November 15th board work session, we are seeking approval for items 9A through E, which are as follows: the list of bills, the treasurer's report, the budgetary transfers, the audit report, of which a bound copy was handed to each of the board members this evening. That copy is the same version as the draft version, which everyone received at the work session, as well as the repository tax sale. An item of interest, both of those properties, as according to the Board of Assessments website, are owned by one company. That company is Steel Plant Equipment Corp. Item 9F is the Berkheimer Liaison Appointment Resolution 1603, which is a resolution for approval to appoint myself as Director of Business Services and Danielle Penza, Business Office Supervisor, as authorized contact representatives or liaisons to make requests and receive tax information from Berkheimer Associates.
All right, thank you. May I have a motion to approve the fiscal items A through F as presented? Second. Any discussion? Okay. Yeah.
One quick question about Berkheimer. I know there was some discussion about looking at other vendors and all that. I was just wondering, at some point, can we get an update where we're at with that?
That is on the list for Mr. Klaus.
Good question. Any other questions? Okay, all those in favor? Yep, passes 8-0. Okay. Personnel items, Dr. Harney.
Yes, this month we have 2 resignation classified for your approval. We have 1 employment classified. We have 1 compensated leave professional. We have 1 sabbatical leave for your approval. We have 6 supplemental contracts, of which 3 through 6 are new this week. We have 4 additions to our classified substitute list. We have the approved list of volunteers as attached. We have 1 community education employment for your approval and 1 advisement.
Thank you. May I have a motion to approve the personnel items? Second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay, thank you. Now let's move on to the curriculum and programs. Dr. Katona.
There is a summary of the course proposals for 2017-18. there is a total of 10 course proposals. 3 of these are core classes, and the remaining ones are electives. And we also have a total of 11 courses being recommended for removal for 2017-18.
All right, thank you. May I have a motion to approve the course proposals? Second. Any discussion? Okay, moving right along. All those in favor? All right, thank you. Now turn it over to policy and Dr. Zerbe.
On the agenda for your approval this evening are 13 policies up for second reading, and they're listed on the board as follows: membership attendance, severe allergies, food allergies, possession, use of inhalers, motor vehicle search, employment administrator suspension, non-tenure employees, management team, compensation plan, job-related expenses, and vacation.
All right, thank you. May I have a motion to approve? Second. Any discussion? All those in favor? All right, thank you. So we're going to change things up here. We're going to break out
13D.
Yeah, thank you. 13D is a separate item. So why don't we go with all the others minus 13D first?
Yep, so for 13A is gift and donations, accept those gifts and donations as we discussed at the work session last week. Approve the trips as listed. Approve Mr. Klaus as management trustee for the Bucks-Montgomery County Healthcare Consortium. And under 13E, approve the authorization of the administration to proceed with preparation and solicitation of bids for remaining field project at a cost not to exceed $16,500.
All right, thank you. So may I have a motion to accept the gifts and donations as presented? Second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay, thank you. May I have a motion to approve the trip to Vermont and the appointment of Thomas Klaus as management trustee as presented? Second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Thank you.
13E.
Yeah, 13E, may I have a motion to proceed with preparation and solicitation of bids for remaining field project items as presented? Second. Any discussion?
Hold on, I just want to say at a cost not to exceed $16,500.
At a cost to not exceed $16,500.
And I just want to say that is the cost of getting the bids. That is not the cost of the project. I just wanted to be clear on that.
That's accurate. That's for the preparation of the bids and the review of the bids, and then that'll be the presentation to the board.
Any other discussion? All those in favor? Okay, thank you. Now on to 13D.
So again, the motion is read as follows. Authorize the administration to proceed with securing of a contract for a single private provider as listed in the program design option that includes 2 full-time officers and augmented services as presented.
May I have a motion? Second. Any discussion? I think we had a lot of discussion already. Yeah.
I just want to clarify or make sure I'm understanding. So in what was provided to us this evening, we are looking at approving you to go forward with Program Design 2, Option 1. Is that correct?
This reference is the second page of the program design sheet provided by Mr. Sosnovic. So there's 2 pages. The first page I would consider Option 1, and the second page would be Program Design 2, or Option 2.
So yes.
So yes. And I just want to make it clear that while we're securing the contracts, we are bringing the contracts back for the board approval.
So I respect the decision to vote on, no problem. I'll have my opinion, but just to point out that this $149,924 per year is approximately $50,000 more than we budgeted for. So we, I think, took $200,000 with anticipation of being able to take $200,000 out of the SRO program. It was 100 for this year.
But this is a whole year, this cost.
Yeah, no, but from a calendar year's perspective, it's half as much. I understand. I'm just pointing out that I think we still have a budget issue around that. We're not saving as much as we originally said in this year's budget. Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I thought that we had said that the total budget for the SRO program would be $200,000. We're reducing it by $100,000 for the current year, correct?
The original budget was $299,000. We reduced $99,000.
And it was $100,000 for this budget. Okay. Thanks for the correction.
So this is the recommendation of the administration that we're voting on?
Yes.
I had to say it. Okay. Any other comment?
No, just vote.
Okay. All those in favor? We got it? Oh, okay. All right, thank you. That one tired me out, I have to admit. All right, so we're on to dates for the board members' calendars. November 22nd, that's tonight. December 5th, we are going to have our reorg meeting and board meeting. December 6th will be the finance committee. I don't have any old business, do you? Dr. Serby, okay.
Can I just jump in there real quick?
Sure.
Just to clarify, the meeting on December 5th will be a full board meeting following the reorg. We are planning on conducting business that evening, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure that the public was aware of that. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you, that was my question too, more for childcare reasons than anything, and of course, board business.
So yeah, we'll do the reorg at the beginning, have that as a separate meeting, and then we'll start the regular board meeting. Okay. Any other old business or new business? I have nothing for either. Okay, let's open it up to the general courtesy of the floor. Anybody? Brian? Just a point of clarification, we voted for them to pursue getting a more detailed formal offer from a vendor. So if we decide to go with that, we'll have to vote to say, yes, this is the cost, and we want to go with that at a future meeting. That we haven't voted on, yeah.
How long are these contracts?
Yeah. Well, wait. If you have more questions, courtesy of the floor, just come up here, okay? So we can get it on the microphone. Thanks.
Hi. Brian Earnshaw again, Lower Providence. I watched a video from last week's work session, and there was this discussion about full-day kindergarten. Just had a question regarding some of the cost numbers that were discussed. There was an additional salary number of about $713,000 put out there. Was that all in? Meaning, does that include salary, PSERs, benefits, payroll taxes, tuition, everything?
It doesn't include tuition.
Okay, but it includes the bigger numbers like PSERs and payroll taxes, et cetera. Okay. And then on the subject of transportation, and don't let me like I'm nuts, but any consideration to bringing that service back in-house? I believe we're in year 3 of a 5-year first student contract. And since year 1 of first student, I've kind of heard nothing but service issues, and I've not heard of any demonstrated cost savings as a result of outsourcing that function. Just something to think about as you look at transportation. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Go ahead, John.
John Andrews, again, on the list of bills this evening, there were bills for various charter schools, and I got the number of charter school students for last year in the data portfolio that came out recently, and I'm wondering, in this school year, is the number of charter school students the same, more or less? Surely someone at the table ought to have an answer for that.
Can I say something or no? I don't know the exact answer, but it was recently discussed at an education committee meeting, and I believe it went down a small number, but it did go down, and Dr. Engstedt gave a report on that and has made efforts.
All right, thank you. And I notice at the board table this evening that there's a person I had not seen before, and he looks like Scott Dorn's younger brother. No offense, but we all know that as well as we all know that there's a small crowd typically at this time in these meetings, but there's an unknown crowd, at least to me, watching the videos either on cable TV or by watching them on YouTube or whatever. And there are other school districts where at the start of the meeting, the people at the table each identify themselves, and that just takes a few minutes, and I think it's a fair courtesy to the. It's a fair. I think, I guess I'm trying to say that it would just take a couple minutes at the start of the meeting to identify the people other than the junior directors. So we've got to start on it at least. With regard to the grade 5 math scores from last spring, I think one thing that is missing is that at Skyview, where there was an extensive program setting up lots of courses for the day, that the academic courses, in distinction to a lot of school districts where they're an hour long each day, at Skyview they're 45 minutes long, and that caused definite problems with the last math resource, aka a book, and it may still be a problem in terms of the time to learn mathematics, aside from your changing math resources from the prior year to the last year. So, to me, there's still an issue of school day design at Skyview, and I think courses like math would benefit from having hour-long classes. I don't think that's a subtlety, and I think that without adequate math preparation, the students suffer in the high school in the science classes, and then are not inclined to go into some of the college programs that prepare them for what's needed in industry today. And I think that takes care of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right. May I have a motion to adjourn? Second. All those in favor? All right. Thank you, everybody.